Anthropic just shipped a frontier model that sometimes refuses to answer you and silently hands the question to a smaller one. That's Claude Fable 5, launched today, alongside a locked down sibling called Mythos 5. The interesting part isn't the benchmark wins, it's that the safety story is now a routing story. Here's what shipped. Fable 5 is what Anthropic calls a Mythos class model. Same underlying weights as the unrestricted Mythos 5, but tuned and gated so it's safe enough to release generally. Anthropic says it's state of the art on nearly all tested benchmarks of AI capability, with the lead widening on longer, more complex tasks. Knowledge work, vision, scientific research, software engineering, the usual axes pushed harder. Mythos 5 is the same model with the safeguards lifted in some areas. It's not going on the API for everyone, it's going to a small group of cyber defenders and infrastructure providers, initially through something called Project Glasswing, in collaboration with the US government. So we have two products from one model, a general use version with a safety net and a restricted version for a narrow defense use case. That split is the headline. Let's talk about the safety net first, because it's the part most builders are going to touch. When Fable 5's safeguards trigger, your query doesn't get refused with a polite "I can't help with that." It gets answered by Claude Opus 4.8, Anthropic's next most capable model. The frontier model steps back, the previous frontier model steps forward, and from the outside you just get a response. Worth knowing. Anthropic says the safeguards trigger, on average, in less than 5% of sessions. They've also said the tuning is conservative, meaning it will sometimes catch harmless requests. Those are their words, not mine. In practice, this means if you're building on Fable 5, you have a model whose answer quality is non-deterministic in a new way. Not temperature non-deterministic, routing non-deterministic. 5% of the time you're getting Opus 4.8 output and you may not know it. Here's the catch. If you're benchmarking Fable 5 yourself, running your own evals, comparing it to GPT or Gemini, picking a model for a production workload, that 5% routing rate distorts your numbers. Some fraction of your eval traffic is silently being served by a different model. On adversarial or edge case evals, the distortion gets worse, because that's exactly where the safeguards are most likely to fire. The cybersecurity framing makes this sharper. Anthropic explicitly says Fable 5's capabilities in areas like cybersecurity could be misused to cause serious damage without safeguards. So if you're a security researcher, a red teamer, anyone whose legitimate work looks adversarial to a classifier, you're going to be in the false positive bucket more often than the average user. That's not a complaint, it's a reasonable trade. Ship the model now with conservative gates, loosen them as the detectors improve. But it does mean Fable 5 in production behaves like two models stitched together, and your observability needs to account for that. Now, Mythos 5. This is the part that's getting undercovered. Same underlying model, safeguards lifted in some areas, going to cyber defenders and infrastructure providers through Project Glasswing with the US government. Anthropic isn't selling raw frontier capability to anyone with a credit card. They're selling it to a vetted defensive partner pool. The shape of that decision matters. A year ago, the Frontier Lab pitch was, we'll publish a model card and rate limit the API. Now it's, we'll ship two SKUs, a gated one for the public, an ungated one for a specific institutional partner, and the institutional one is wired into a named government program. That's a different operating model. The lab is no longer just a model provider. It's a model provider plus a tiered access program plus a government collaboration. Whether you think that's good or bad, it's a structural change in how frontier capability reaches the market. Stepping back for a second, this is the second time in roughly a year that a frontier lab has shipped a top-tier model behind a real-time safety classifier that reroutes queries to a smaller model. OpenAI did a version of this with their safety routing on ChatGPT. Anthropic is now doing it explicitly at the model release level with named fallback weights. The pattern is frontier model plus prior frontier model plus a router sold as one product. That's not a model anymore. It's a system. For builders, the implication is concrete. If you're picking a foundation model for a multi-month build, you're not picking a single set of weights. You're picking a routing policy, a fallback model, and a refusal surface that the vendor can change on you. The thing you benchmarked in week 1 isn't the thing serving your users in month 6. If you care about determinism, evals, regulated industries, anything reproducible, that's a design constraint you have to plan around now, not later. So here's the concrete thing to do this week if you're building on Anthropic. Run your own eval suite against Fable 5 and log every response with the model. Identifier Anthropic returns in the API metadata. If Opus 4.8 shows up in that field, you've caught a routing event. Tally the rate. Compare it to your normal traffic mix. You want to know two numbers: what fraction of your real workload trips the safeguards, and whether the Opus 4.8 fallback is good enough for your use case when it does. Those two numbers are the thing you need to decide whether Fable 5 is safe to depend on, in the engineering sense, not the policy sense. If you're a security researcher specifically, expect the false positive rate on your traffic to be well above 5% and budget for it. That's what I've got on Fable 5 and Mythos 5. If you run those routing rate numbers on your own workload, tell me in the comments what you saw. I want to compare notes for a follow-up once people have a week of data. See you in the next one.